Welcome to Ministry Hacks. My name is Ross McCall. I work in digital products and services here at Crew, and our guest today is Professor Rick Brunson from the University of Central Florida. Rick teaches mobile journalism at UCF, as well as working for our local newspaper and our local TV station. Today's ministry hack is entitled Win It in a Minute, Shooting Compelling Mobile Video. A few years ago, when I was working in campus ministry in Scotland, a group of students and I went out on a very cold winter's day to shoot a video to try and recruit Canadian students to come to Scotland for a spring break trip. I had my trusty camcorder that I'd had for several years, and we trotted up a hill to shoot that video. When we reached the top of the hill, we discovered that my trusty camcorder was dead. After I got over the initial panic, one of my students reached into his pocket and told me that he had a perfectly good camera on his iPhone. So we spent the rest of that day shooting a video around Glasgow University, and at the end of that we had something we were actually really pleased with that was shown at winter conferences across Canada. Today's ministry hack is about learning how to use the camera that's in your pocket to create compelling videos for multiple purposes, and we'll be doing a follow-up hack on how to do the editing part of that process using your smartphone as well. So with no further ado, over to Rick.
Ross, it's great to be with you again. Thank you for
coming.
the invitation. So today we're going to talk about Win It in a Minute, shooting compelling mobile video with the camera that you have. I mean, the best camera to have to shoot anything is the camera that you have with you, right? So these days we are all carrying around these wonderful devices in our pocket, as you mentioned, and we can use them to tell compelling stories with video. So we're going to show you how to take some simple steps today to do that, and to do that well. So what's the it that we're trying to win? When we say win it in a minute, what's the it? That it factor. It's engagement. People today in our media-saturated world are very distracted, and they are being constantly bombarded with all kinds of media. So we have to be able to break through with whatever kind of message we're trying to deliver and reach them with and engage them with. And so video is one way to do that. But we have to do that well and think about how we're using video to try to reach people. We've reached the tipping point in the world of video where mobile is king. 60% of all online video now is viewed on a mobile device. So more people are watching and consuming video on their smartphones or their tablets than they are on a desktop. So we have to keep that in mind of the end user, the person who's going to be watching this video. They're likely to be watching it on their phone. Americans are now spending 30 minutes per day watching video on their phones. That's up from just 4 minutes a day in 2012. That's a huge increase. And that's 10 minutes more per day than on personal computers. So clearly, when we talk about people watching video, what that means is they're watching it on their phones. What we also know from looking and studying analytics and how people use and view video is that 75% of people who watch mobile video leave a video after 2 minutes. So the overwhelming majority of people who are watching mobile video on their phones, which is most people now, after 2 minutes, they're gone. So shorter is definitely better. So we have to keep that in mind as we approach the story that we're trying to tell with video, is keep it to 2 minutes or less. So that's what we mean by win it in a minute. Win attention, win engagement, and keeping in mind the person on the other end of this, what they're likely to see and what their tolerance is for hanging in there so that they get the entire message that we're trying to convey to them. So let's keep in mind, again, as we're approaching the video we're going to shoot, what we want to do and what needs to be in it. So it needs to be within a minute to two. In my classes and with my students, we target length a minute to a minute 15, really no more than a minute 30. What we want in it in terms of elements are A-roll. So A-roll is a videographer's term for talking head, okay? It's a shot where someone is speaking into the camera and you're framing just their head and their shoulders, head and neck. So that's what we mean by A-roll. Captivating, interesting sound bites with the subject, the person in your video that you are focusing on. And then the video also needs to have what we call B-roll. B-roll are additional shots that add visual interest and variety to the story. So you have A-roll where the person is framed, in your shot, talking head, someone speaking something interesting to the viewer, and then you have extra shots, B-roll, that you surround that A-roll, that talking head with, that adds visual interest and variety to the story. And then we're going to put all of that together in a video editing app, which we're going to talk about in our next session. And all of this is done on your phone, either with iMovie or Androvid if you're an Android operating system user on your phone. But we're doing all of this with this one device. So we have a video to show our viewers that's kind of a sample of what we're talking about. This is a video that I shot this past Sunday at my own church that focuses on a young woman who is active in our church's music ministry. So let's take a look at it. And again, it was shot totally on my iPhone.
Hey, I'm Allison Myers, and I serve here at Metro Life Church in the worship ministry. The heart of worship ministry to me is really made up of several different things. First of all, I would say the first thing would be making sure that the motive of what we're doing is ultimately just to bring glory to God in every aspect of what we're pursuing. Preparation, we believe that we're called to do what we do excellently, and we want to glorify God through our excellence, and that means that we put time into learning the music and to practice and to develop our craft in a way that when we take it to the church, it serves, and God is brought glory through what we're doing there. The joy of being involved in music ministry to me is the fact that we get to use the thing that we love, which is music, and use it for the church and use it to glorify God and bring others joy through it. I can't think of a thing that would be more joy-filled than music. And so just getting to use that for the glory of God and to bless others is one of the best gifts in the world.
So let's talk about the steps, three really simple steps that you need to think about and you can deploy in shooting a mobile video. The first step is thinking about what piece of the story that you're trying to tell can best be told with video. Some parts of your story are best told in another way, with writing, with narrative form, with maybe a still photo. So we need to think about what piece of this story that we're trying to tell is best told with video. So one way to do that is before you even get to the scene where your story is unfolding and is going to take place, anticipate what you're likely to see there and hear there that would make for good video. Even before you get there, try to think ahead, roll the film in your mind of what you're anticipating this scene to be like, what might make for good video. So I have a simple test that I use with my students in my mobile journalism class that I just call the SAVE system, the SAVE test. And it's an acronym for sound, action, voice, and emotion. So think ahead. What in this story is likely to have the elements of good natural sound? Sound is more important, I think, in video than the actual visuals that we see, because it's sound that captivates the viewer's attention, and it's sound that actually keeps the viewer in the video. So what kind of interesting natural sounds are occurring in that, are likely to be occurring in that scene that you can capture with video. Action. Are people doing something? If you just have a scene where people are standing around a table or sitting in a room and not doing anything, that's not going to make for very compelling video. People need to be doing something for it to be interesting. The third part of this acronym is voice. Are you going to be interviewing someone that has an energetic voice, or maybe a compelling, enticing, interesting accent, like my friend Ross here? I could listen to Ross read the phone book all day and it would be captivating. So does your subjects have an interesting voice? The last one is emotion. Emotions are what we remember even more than facts. And so emotions are important. Are the people involved in your story excited about something? Are they joyful about something? Are they angry about something? In news, we cover a lot of protests. People are angry about something. So is there emotion in the story? And if there's emotion there, you can capture it with video. So the more of these elements, sound, action, voice, emotion, that your story is likely to have, the better the chances are that your video is going to be good. So that's step one.
Okay, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
So in the context of a nonprofit like ourselves, just thinking of scenarios where people would be putting this sort of thing into practice, you might have someone like me who's shooting a short promo video for a local ministry. It might be a church event that's going on. It might be a fundraising event that's going on. Or something that would be very common for our organization would be students, for example, shooting footage while they're on a mission trip. Mm-hmm. Now, I can imagine your students, after they've been in your class, taking this structure and you're giving them assignments and they're going and planning something. Mm. So with something like a fundraising dinner or a church event, or even the promo video, you think, yes, I can plan out what I'm going to shoot there. But what we're also talking about is being ready to capture the stuff that just happens. I know from listening to you tell stories in the past of amazing things that you just happened to be in front of, and you always had your trusty smartphone with you to capture those events. So, and often those are the things that bring real life or make those videos look different from every other promo video for a mission trip that a local ministry's ever made, for example. How do you think this structure of sound, action, voice, emotion, how much do you expect people to be able to apply that in the moment, or are you really talking about more planned situations?
And the reason it's an acronym is it's easy to store away in that computer file in this wonderful thing we have between our ears. I'm talking about using this as a framework, not just necessarily for planning, but when you're in the moment and something is unfolding in front of you, that scene that's unfolding in front of you, does it have sound? Does it have action? Does it have voice? Does it have emotion? If you see those things happening in front of you, it should click something in your brain that goes, aha, this would make good video. And then you whip out your phone and flip on that camera app and start shooting. So I think it's about becoming attuned to these elements in your brain, not so much as some kind of an outline that you keep tucked away in your filing cabinet, but in your head, when you're in a situation where you see in front of you or you hear in front of you, there's sound, action, voice, emotion, then you have a potential video story unfolding in front of you, and it's time to pull that camera out and start shooting. The thing that you mentioned, the scenario there at the end about students, taps on something I think is important with video is people. The great thing about storytelling and the great thing that I've always enjoyed about being involved with journalism and being a journalist and now teaching journalism is that storytelling allows us to take our viewers and our audience to places that they've never been before and to introduce them to interesting people that they've never met before. So I think the other piece here that we can add, is there an interesting person that you've encountered in your ministry or when you're out and about doing your thing, in your ministry? Are there interesting people that you want your audience to be introduced to who have compelling stories? And video is a good way to tell that.
That's really helpful. Let me take it back a second to what you were saying earlier about A-roll and B-roll, and just kind of link that to this. To go back to the scenario I found myself in with my students in Glasgow shooting a video. I remember shooting various segments of them speaking directly to the Canadian students we were trying to recruit to come over. And I remember what I thought was a very moving segment of me inside the chapel at Glasgow Cathedral telling them about the history of the city and so forth. And then really just because we thought we had to fill in some space, we did some sequences of our feet walking around the campus, and we sped those up in the video just because we were having fun with the editing software. Would it be fair to say like that? What would you say about a video that I think we tend to emphasize the A-roll segments over the B-roll unless we've had training like this, where we think at an event or when we're on a trip. I've seen lots of videos, for example, in our ministry that are very weighted towards talking heads type stuff, and people saying quotes that they've obviously had a few minutes to prepare beforehand, and then maybe there's tagged on a little bit of what you're describing as B-roll. In a good, let's say, 1 to 2 minute video, what do you think the proportion should be between A-roll and B-roll, and what happens when a video has too much A-roll?
When it has too much A-roll, unless the person is just flat out famous, it's going to be boring. When there's just a talking head droning on and on, so that B-roll, those B-roll shots become really important to keep the video moving, to keep the action moving, and to hold the viewer's interest. You'll notice that in the video that we just viewed, it was 1:22 long. The A-roll is about 50-50, maybe even less than 50-50, where we see Allison's face talking into the camera, and we actually see more of her environment itself. So it's, I haven't done a time count here, but just looking at it, it's about a 50-50 mix, and that's probably about right. But you're right. If you go the other way and it's too heavy on A-roll, it quickly becomes uninteresting of just people talking.
And actually, to look at your acronym of sound, action, voice, and emotion, you could theoretically fulfill all of those things with either A-roll or B-roll, I'm guessing.
You could, and you'll notice that even in the video, the B-roll that we're showing is related to the subject. I mean, we see the subject doing things, we see the subject in her environment, so all the shots are related to her, so that there's a connection and a cohesiveness and a coherence to the overall story.
Thanks.
So step 2, which kind of segues nicely to your point, you shoot your A-roll and your B-roll. Really important, a couple of things of a practical nature. You need to make sure that your camera's battery and your phone's battery is 100%. And you need to have a portable power source with you, because video burns up your battery on your phone really fast. So the absolute worst situation you can be in, and trust me, I've been in this situation a couple times, where you have an assignment and you're there and it's time to shoot the video and your battery is just draining like a glass of orange juice down your throat. And the glass is empty in really short order. So you need to make sure that your battery is 100% and that you have a portable source with you to keep that battery charged, because without the battery, you're not going to have any video. The other thing is to show up early if this is something that's a planned event. I have a really good friend, a legendary photographer, photojournalist in our market here named Red Huber, who has a saying that if you're not early, you're late. So on the day that I shot this video, they knew that I was going to be there at 8. I showed up at 7:30. And in a lot of the shots that you see in the video that we watched, many of those were shot in that 7:30 to 8 o'clock time frame before everybody even arrived for choir practice. So I was able to kind of get there, get on location, become familiar with the area. That was a part of our church that I never spent any time in. So I was able to just walk around and capture some good B-roll. So show up early, make sure that your gear is good to go and that you're fully charged on that battery. So the A-roll is really important. The sound bites with your subject. That's going to kind of serve as the base for your video that you drop your B-roll shots on top of. You need to shoot plenty of B-roll. I can't emphasize this enough. Always shoot more B-roll than you think you're going to need. For this 1 minute and 22-second video, I shot 76 clips. 76 clips. Now, I didn't use anywhere near that many, but I had them if I need them. Always shoot more B-roll than you need because that adds visual interest and variety. So what do we mean by B-roll? It's people doing something. It's signs, it's objects, it's artifacts in the environment that relate to your A-roll subject that sheds light on who they are, what they're about, what they do. If you count the number of clips in the video that we just showed, the number of B-roll clips, there are 12 or 13. That's in addition to the A-roll. So that's a good rule of thumb that I teach my students. For every 1 minute of video, you should have 10 to 15 B-roll clips in the video. So shoot more than what you need. Also, you want your A-roll to touch your B-roll. And what we mean by that is the themes and subjects and what I call keywords that your A-roll subject touches on or emphasizes in what she or he is saying. You want B-roll that illustrates those points. That's really important. So your A-roll should touch your B-roll. Okay? Step 3, the 5 S's of good video. First of all, we need to make sure that we're steadying and setting our shot. The two really negatives of using a mobile device as opposed to a really expensive 4K camera is shakiness and diminished sound quality. So we need to diminish those negatives as much as we can, and there's a few things that we can do. Use a tripod. So you can buy a relatively inexpensive GorillaPod or monopod that will you can bracket into your device that will create a steady shot. If another way is a gimbal. At where I teach at UCF, we have purchased mobile video kits for the students who take my class, and that kit includes a gimbal, which is an electronic motorized bracket device, as you can see in the photo, where you load your smartphone into it and it holds your shot steady. I can run across the room with this gimbal with my camera on, and the shot will be as steady as a rock, even when I'm moving. So if you can afford a gimbal, they're relatively inexpensive, anywhere from $100 to $140. It will really tremendously steady up your shot. If you don't have a gimbal, if you don't have a tripod, another thing you can do is the lock and lean method. So lock your elbows. Lock your elbows with your body. That will steady it up, and hold your phone, your camera this way. The other thing you can do is find something stable, a wall, a concrete, piling, a pole, something that's immovable, and kind of lean against it, and that will help steady your shot too. A desk. Turn your elbows into a tripod and use your camera like so, and that will steady up your shot. Okay. So you want your shot to be steady. Shaky video is bad. I know the Blair Witch Project movie was a big hit back in the 90s, and it unleashed this whole fusillade of shaky video is artistic video, and I get it, but for most people, shaky video as a viewing experience is not that good. So try to keep your shot as steady as possible. The next X is sequence your shots. So the key is to shoot a wide variety of shots: wide, medium, tight, super tight. And then once you have all your clips, you want to storyboard them into a logical sequence so that your video story has some cohesiveness and some coherence to it. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The next step is to step into the light. You need to take advantage of available natural lighting. You're not carrying a $10,000 light kit with you, or you don't have, a nice TV live truck with lighting with you when you're using one of these devices. So you have to be mindful of, is there good available light? Move your subject, if you need to, into an available light source so that your video and your shots are not too dark. Next, step closer. This is really important because sound is the other negative with using a smartphone as a video camera. You only have good sound with one of these devices. As good as they are, and they're getting better all the time, 3 to 5 feet. After 3 to 5 feet, that zone, the sound quality drops off dramatically. So you need to make sure you're shooting your subject within that 3 to 5 feet zone, which can make you and the subject a little uncomfortable at first because you have to get close. So I always, kind of warn the subject and make them comfortable with the fact that, hey, I'm going to be shooting you and it's going to be a little close because I'm shooting with my iPhone today. So I'm going to have to get a little close to you. Don't worry about it. Just kind of speak as naturally as you can because you need to get really close to pick up good sound. The other thing that you can do if you have the resources is to buy an external microphone, a lav mic that will plug into your phone. You can also buy an adapter to plug into your phone, plug the mic into your phone so that you can pick up better quality sound and increase that. And we, in the shot that you see with the mobile kit that we use at school, we use an external Rode mic, and that picks up sound out a little farther and helps boost the quality a little better on the audio.
So in my case, when I was shooting my video in Glasgow, I was foolishly at the top of a hill because I thought that was the most dramatic shot of Glasgow University. It's also the windiest place in Scotland where I was stood. And so when I shot the video on an older version of one of these, of course, all of the talking head sections, the A-roll, were full of the sound of wind whistling across the top of Glasgow. Other than being in a location that's less windy, is there anything else that you can really do to compensate for that kind of thing, to make sure that you get better quality sound?
You can actually buy a wind guard that will fit over the end of your phone these days. The BBC uses them. And wind's a problem, and it will stomp all over and crush your audio. So be mindful of that, especially if you're shooting outdoors. That wind could be a problem. So the advantage of outside and not shooting outdoors is the great available light, right? But the downside can be if it's a windy day, that wind will kill your audio. So you might want to consider investing in a wind guard that will slip right on the end of your phone, or using an external microphone with a wind guard that will cut that wind noise. And then finally, sound is king. You want to see with your ears when you're shooting video. Listen out for, as you're in the scene and setting of your video and the story that you're capturing, what's great natural sound. Now for me, shooting a person who's involved with music ministry, it was fairly easy because there's instruments in the room. She's playing the piano, she's playing the guitar, the choir is singing. There's a lot of great natural sound. But you want to be thinking of sound as much as you are of the visuals when you're shooting, because that sound, again, is what captivates the audience. It's what keeps them there. You'll notice in the video that we watched, the first shot that opens the video is Allison strumming on her guitar. that immediately perks up your ears, perks up your interest, and gets you into the story. So, and then keeping that, the element of sound throughout the video becomes important too. So those 3 steps, just taking those simple steps can result automatically in better video. So back to sequencing for a second. A wide variety of shots is important. And this kind of goes to the question you asked earlier, Ross, about A-roll versus B-roll. If all you have is talking head, your video is going to be boring. If all you have is one kind of B-roll, your video is also going to be static and less interesting. So you want to shoot in your B-roll a wide variety of shots. So wide, if you noticed in the video, there's a shot of the entire choir practicing in the music studio. There's more of a medium shot where we come in a little closer and capture Allison directing the choir. We have a tight shot of her hands, in front of the music sheet. And then there's a super tight shot where we come in right on her hands, playing the keys on the piano. So you want to be constantly thinking as you're shooting B-roll, a wide variety of shots to keep it interesting. You want to step back and shoot an entire scene. You want to come in a little closer. You want to think tightly like the person, and then detail shots, the hands doing something, signage, anything else that you can come in on that will add some visual interest. So wide variety of shots in the B-roll is really important. This is an old photographer's trick, whether it's still photography or whether you're shooting video, and that's composing your shots in thirds. So you can do this by turning on the grid on your camera, on your camera's camera setting, and it will automatically throw a grid onto your phone that looks like this so that you can compose your shots in thirds. So what we mean by that is, if you look at the slide here, this shot with the grid is ruled off in thirds. There's a top left third, there's a top right third, there's a bottom left third, there's a bottom right third. So where those crosshairs come together, those intersectional points, are great places to center the subject of your shot. Now, why does this work and make the shot more interesting? It creates energy, it creates tension, it creates interest more than centering your subject in the dead center of the shot. Somehow, the way our eyes work, there's more tension and energy and interest when the subject of your shot is placed and framed in the shot in one of these intersectional points in the thirds of the frame. So another important thing to keep in mind.
Let me ask you a question there. So I'm a writer and an editor, and so I generally think in terms of what I've learned about that craft. One thing that I've learned, I know we've talked about before, is that a quality that's often lost in the kind of writing that goes on within organizations like ours is tension. We're generally writing very positive stories about worthwhile things, and sometimes, but in a good story, whether it's a novel or a story that you're watching, the key ingredient, arguably, is tension. If you don't have tension, it's like watching a flat line.
Right.
How do you think, other than what you've just showed us with the thirds, well, firstly, does that same rule apply if you're making the kind of videos that I've described to you? And what are some tricks that you've taught your students about creating tension in video?
Well, theologically, in a Christian context, our whole religion is built on tension. Sin, redemption. Sanctification is tension. So tension is part of the narrative of faith, and it's part of the narrative of storytelling. Life has tension, so we relate to it. We all experience it, and the more that your viewer sees that in the story, the more that they're going to relate to it.
It seems to me as well that when we're telling positive stories, which for the most part we are in this organization, there's two ways of telling those stories. There is, here is an example of something that succeeded in a short video, hopefully. And here is an example of someone who had to overcome something in order to succeed. Generally, I try and shoot for the latter because I think that it has that tension. There's an obstacle that has to be overcome. Do you think that's true in video? The same rule is true in video?
I do. What becomes a little tougher in a mobile video is where you're shooting just a minute to under 2 minutes, is there's not a lot of time to develop that. You get your subject in a tree, throw rocks at your subject, get them out of the tree. The old standard Hollywood film model.
That makes me wonder if that's part of the reason why having lots of B-roll is particularly useful. Today we're talking about shooting video, but we'll also be talking later about editing video. So I wonder if that's one of the advantages of having lots of B-roll, is trying to set up in terms of, I wonder, very briefly, what you would say about the ideal place to start short videos, because I've read some things recently about the fact that particularly with digital writing, it's very important to drop people in at a moment of tension rather than have a big setup.
Yeah, I think with mobile video that's shorter and we want to keep it compelling, the strategies that I teach in class is pick sound or action. So either pick a compelling moment of sound that will lead your video story with it, or drop the viewer into some action where people are doing things so that you can put them in the scene, in the moment, and there's something energetic happening that you're putting them in and involving them in right away. So sound or action are typically two of the best strategies for starting a short mobile video like this.
So you would say probably avoid starting with a talking head,
absolutely.
Giving lots of information.
Absolutely, that's deadly and
That's
dreadful.
good to know.
And you want to avoid that.
That wipes out most of my back catalogue of videos.
So one of our final points is thinking of your mobile story in pieces, because your video is likely to be part of a larger story. So in my class, my students are required to, when they're doing an assignment, a story assignment, to do a 3-part package. So they're writing a narrative story, and we talked about writing for mobile and with a mobile device in an earlier installment of this series. And then there's a still photo part of it, and then there's the video piece of the package. You want each one of those pieces of the story to be leveraged in such a way that they bring and tap into the unique value for the audience, for the reader and the viewer, that those mediums bring. So there's things that we can do with writing powerfully that we can't necessarily do with video. There's a way to use video that has more power and engagement than writing. The still photo, we don't want the still photo to basically be a rip-off screen grab of the video, because that's repetitive. It duplicates, and it's a wasted opportunity. So you want to show something in your still photo that gives the viewer a different perspective, that illustrates the point of your story in a way differently than your video does. So you really want to think of these 3 different platforms, writing, photography, and video, as unique parts of a whole, and you want to leverage the value of each of them for your viewer so that you tell a richly textured story. So video is part of that, and you want to think of what power, what value can video bring to this overall story that I'm trying to tell.
Rick, thank you so much for your time today. Perhaps you have some questions that this session has prompted for you. We would love to hear those questions. If you have questions for Rick, you can send those in to us as well. Please just email content@crew.org. We'll be doing a follow-up webinar with Rick on editing for mobile, and we hope that you'll come back and enjoy that one. But for the meantime, thank you for watching this ministry hack.